Hi, I'm Joel Sharpton, one half of the Articulate Coven Podcast. I'm a lifelong Anne Rice fan, and I have started revisiting some of the vampiric fiction that I loved as a kid, but that I haven't built a whole fandom around like I have with Anne Rice. This video shouldn't be read as impugning either the author or the works in question. I'm just establishing the differences and why I've fallen so madly in love with one and why another I just enjoy revisiting. There, disclaimers out of the way. The Necroscope by Brian Lumley was released in 1986, followed by Necroscope 2, Wamphyri in 1988, and Necroscope 3, The Source in 1989. Two more books in 1990 and 1991 finished the quintet, but we're just discussing that first trilogy today. Brian Lumley was a member of the British Army's Royal Military Police, who began writing novels within the Lovecraftian Cthulhu mythos in 1974. After several successful works in that world, he struck an even bigger gold mine with the Necroscope series beginning in 1986. Necroscope means, in Lumley's books anyway, someone who has the ability to speak to and hear the dead. This isn't to be confused with a necromancer, who has to tear the secrets from the dead's bodies. Harry Keogh, Lumley's main character, is born and lives most of his life as a friend of the dead. That might not seem like that big a deal, but in Lumley's world, whatever you did in life, you continue to do and perfect in death, at least in your mind. So, Harry gains the ability to fight and defend himself from an old army boxing champion. He learns high-level mathematics and eventually the ability to move himself through time and space from the genius August Ferdinand Mobius. Over the course of the series, he learns a lot more than that. All of those abilities wouldn't be necessary unless Lumley had cooked up a really great villain. In addition to some very brutal and cunning Russians, you have to remember these books were written at the height of the Cold War, Lumley reimagines vampires from the slick, well-dressed, seductive creatures Anne Rice's books hold into a much more Lovecraftian form, full of body horror and interdimensional shenanigans. Yes, in these books, the vampires are actually alien parasites from another dimension. I'm missing the original Necroscope, by the way, and if you happen to be the person I loaned it to sometime in the 2000s, just know I'm still a little mad at you. I guess I should just order a new one. Let's all practice some pronunciation, shall we? Vamphyri. Say it with me now. Vamphyri. That's how Lumley's creatures refer to themselves. And yes, it is supposed to sound a bit like Bela Lugosi's Count Dracula. You see, that portal I mentioned to another interdimensional vampiric world, it's in Romania. Transylvania, to be specific. And the humans and the creatures that have come through it over the millennia have a language that sounds an awful lot like ancient Romanian. The details of all this backstory are sort of parsed out over books 2 and 3. The first book is very much focused on introducing the main character, Harry Keogh himself, and the E branch of the British government that he works for. So, what do I love about the Necroscope trilogy? First and foremost, E branch. The fact that this series starts as a pretty straightforward spy thriller with hints of the paranormal and psychic powers is awesome. The idea of every major government having their own group of psychic sleuths and detectives, gifted humans who can defend against rogue attacks from other nations and outside threats, things that are beyond the power of the regular military and police, that's dope. It's basically Anne Rice's Talamasca, but militarized, I guess. Harry Keogh himself. Harry can be at times a bit of a Mary Sue. There is no problem that seems to be beyond him, and he's always got the right intentions. But as his challenges rise and his connections to this Vamphyri world increase, well, all of that shifts, and he makes plenty of mistakes along the way. Harry is likable and believable in his entry to this insane world and his responses to it. He also doesn't dither about once confronted with the danger of vampires in his world. He gets from go that this has to be eradicated for his species to survive, and he's probably the only one that can do it. The Mobius Continuum. The cover of these books with the insane vampire faces of different creatures, that's the thing that made me pick up the first book in the bookstore when I originally found this. But the blurb discussing Harry's teleportation powers and how he learned them from a long dead mathematician, that's what made me actually buy it. The idea of instantaneous travel to any point on the globe and eventually any point in time as well, it's something that a lot of stories have played with in one way or another. Putting that alongside such a dangerous vampire story is exhilarating. Just imagine Nightcrawler from the X-Men bamfing around a castle, dueling and exploding vampires with stolen Russian grenades. That's Harry's fight scenes, at least some of them. Nasty vampires. Lumley's Wamphyri are dangerous. They are disgusting. And when you finally see some of their original world's versions, they're even more terrifying than all that. Someone who had tried this series years ago described it in the comments of another video as nauseating, and they are not wrong. So, fair warning. I didn't find this unstomachable, but I did find it different. As an Anne Rice fan, I am used to, and yes, I'll admit, prefer my vampires to be dandy gentlemen in fine clothing and expensive accessories, flaunting their wealth and beauty in the middle of the human society. Lumley's vampires are not that. They are still compelling and cunning and seductive in their own way, but it's a different vibe in a way that I find refreshing and exciting. One last thing in the positives. Lumley's books have a great habit of recapping the previous events in a way that is not boring, fairly brief, and yet absolutely makes it so that you can jump into this series at any point you'd like. So, what didn't I like about at least this first trilogy? It often takes a little bit too long to get the ball rolling on the adventure. In the first book, especially, it's 3/4 in before the vampiric problem of it all actually arises. And for the first trilogy, you get to the third book, The Source, which I just finished most recently, and you're at least 5 hours into the audiobook before Harry shows up at all. Now, Lumley's great at introducing new characters and getting you to care about them, but these books do not read in the same way as the Anita Blake series, where they're straightforward adventures about one character. Even most of Anne's books are written from one character's point of view, and so even when they're telling other people's stories, it sort of feels like you're following the one person. Lumley is closer to something like the George R. R. Martin Song of Fire and Ice books, where you follow multiple POV characters across the saga. All that to say, it's fine and the books are still very enjoyable, but when you name all your books Necroscope, maybe the Necroscope should show up sooner. This isn't so much a didn't like as a what's very different than Anne Rice's works. While I really enjoy Lumley's Necroscope series, and especially the Vampire World trilogy that I'm going to get to in a couple of more books, his series don't deal with the existential questions in the same way that Anne's do. For a 12-year-old kid growing up in a fundamentalist household, trying to understand morality and ethics, sexuality, and more, Anne's books were like college-level courses that I could just borrow from the library. Lumley's series, meanwhile, was an exciting roller coaster ride or a literary superhero story, more in common with the James Bond series than just the government-sponsored warfare. If you like Cthulhu or body horror, you owe it to yourself to check out the Brian Lumley Necroscope series. These are going to be right up your alley. Even if those things aren't your bag, there are really interesting concepts and characters here that are worth exploring. I want to remind you that none of this is to lessen Lumley's books or these works specifically. They are well-written, coherent narratives full of interesting characters and original scenarios. But for me, I'll still take the sexy blonde brat prince over the drooling, dripping denizens of Lumley's world. But Harry Keogh, he can come kick it in New Orleans anytime. Literally, he can just snap and get there, so come on. Stay tuned for more videos like this one. We've got Anne Rice versus Salem's Lot coming up in the next of this series. You can also check out my first video in a watch of the original supernatural soap opera. It's Dark Shadows, and it starts this Saturday morning on YouTube, but you could have already watched it if you're a patron. Link in the show notes.